Live Fit Podcast, episode 129, Mushrooms with Jeff Chilton.
Born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, and we have mushrooms everywhere. We're a wet climate. We've got lots of forests. So I started doing a lot of mushroom hunting in the 60s. I studied mycology at university along with my major, which was anthropology. And then when I graduated university, not knowing what to do with my anthropology degree, I decided at that point I wanted to grow mushrooms. And the other thing, too, was part of my studies in anthropology was the use of mushrooms medicinally and shamanically in other cultures. That was pretty much my field of study, ethno-mycologist. That was what I was really interested in because I was like, well, how are these things used out there and what is their role in all these different cultures? So,
welcome to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson, your resource for all things that contribute to good health. You will hear expert advice and interviews with leading authorities on fitness, food, fat loss, mindset, and the mind-body connection. You will find show notes, articles, and health programs at livefitpodcast.com.
Yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson, your guide to better health. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Today's guest is Jeff Chilton. He's an ethno-mycologist from the Pacific Northwest who's been raising mushrooms since 1973. Jeff was responsible for bringing fresh shiitake mushrooms to the U.S. markets in '78. In the '80s, he started Nammex, a business that introduced medicinal mushrooms to the U.S. nutritional supplement industry. In fact, Jeff's company Nammex was the first to offer a complete line of certified organic mushroom extracts to the supplement industry. Let's hear what Jeff has to say about culinary and medicinal mushrooms. How are you doing today, Jeff?
I'm just fine, Glenn. Thank you very much for having me.
It's my pleasure. I am really excited to learn more about mushrooms, but first, could you give us a little overview of your history, how you got into mushrooms?
Well, I was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, and we have mushrooms everywhere. We're a wet climate. We've got lots of forests. So I started doing a lot of mushroom hunting in the 60s. I studied mycology at university along with my major, which was anthropology. And then when I graduated university, not knowing what to do with my anthropology degree, I decided at that point I wanted to grow mushrooms. And so I went to the only mushroom farm in Washington State. I got a job, and that's kind of where I started my career, so to speak. 1973, I became a mushroom grower.
You said you got into hunting mushrooms in the 60s, and there's one thing that came to my mind, and probably many other people. Were you looking for magic mushrooms?
Oh, of course, yeah. They actually, University of Washington, they were growing right on the campus, and so we had access to them there. And the other thing, too, was part of my studies in anthropology was the use of mushrooms medicinally and shamanically in other cultures. That was pretty much my field of study, ethno-mycologist. That was what I was really interested in because I was like, well, how are these things used out there and what is their role in all these different cultures? So yes, indeed. I mean, that was a time of great experimentation, and I'm really happy to know that they are starting to be reutilized now that things have loosened up a little bit with psychiatrists and psychologists and so on.
I heard that just the other day that somebody was looking or trying to have a research for psychological purposes to use magic mushrooms. What are they called anyway? So the technical name of the mushrooms that give you a psychedelic effect.
Yeah, well, the genus is called psilocybe. And there's multiple species, and maybe what we would just call them is psychoactive mushrooms. That's kind of one of the things that is one of the terms that's being used. But they, back in the 60s, there were a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists that were beginning to use these things. And one of the areas they used them with was addiction. And actually now there are multiple researchers that have been working with them for, I would say, the last 5-6 years as things have just loosened up a bit. I mean, truthfully, I never expected pot to become legalized. I thought they'd shut that down from and ever going to allow it. So the fact that that is now legal in some states and loosening up, and the fact that now they're actually beginning to do more research with psychoactive mushrooms and other psychoactive plants is really a positive thing, and I'm quite happy about it.
Yeah, it is really pretty darn amazing, and I find it's amazing that the states can have these things legal, but the federal government does not. I think it's fantastic because for as long as I can remember, I've been what's the opposite of proponent? A disponent of opponent? Yeah, sorry. I went right by that one. For the longest time, I've been an opponent of all these drugs that doctors tend to prescribe. And I remember when I was in the military, I went in with some sort of an issue, and the doctor, well, he wasn't, I don't think he was a real doctor, but he played one in the Navy. And he listened to me, and then he said, well, what do you want me to give you? And I looked at him, I said, well, nothing, really. I want this problem solved, and I don't see that drugs are going to solve the problem. They're just going to make it bother me less. And he shook his head, yep. So.
Well, I think in the issue that you're describing is that most people go in and they're looking for something that will control the symptoms, and that's what the system is geared to do, is help control the symptoms, take away the pain, or take away the psychological pain. Whereas what we really want is we really want something that will get to what's creating or causing this illness in the first place. And that's kind of where we're seeking alternatives in a lot of cases, because we can look at Western medicine and we can say, man, it's really great for certain things, but chronic illness, it's not so good. So are there alternatives? So a lot of people look for alternatives now. And I'm with you. I don't want to take a drug, a pharmaceutical drug. I totally avoid that. I'm not taking any, haven't taken any like a lot of people my age have to, but I'm not interested in that. I want to find the root of the problem. I want to solve it on that level.
Exactly. That's how I feel too. And the more natural, the better. In fact, just a few episodes ago on episode 123, I had a marijuana doctor on, and she talked about all the different ailments or illnesses that marijuana can help treat, and whether it's the THC or the CBD or combinations, whether it's topically or internally or orally, she, could designate which was best for that particular person's thing. So I imagine you have some sort of knowledge base that's similar with mushrooms. Can you give me an idea what mushrooms are good for?
Sure. And let me say, first of all, that there's so much information out there on the internet that looks at a number of mushrooms as panaceas. Even in some of the research you see where they describe the 30 to 50 different things that mushrooms can be used for. And to some degree, what they're saying is that there's been so much research out there that has demonstrated certain activities with mushrooms. But I'm really opposed to that kind of thinking. I'm opposed to, right now, for example, chaga is being touted as the king of mushrooms. And people will tell you it does everything. That's not helpful at all. It really isn't. Panaceas, we don't need people talking about panaceas. We want to look at these different natural products and go, okay, what can I use this for? What is going to be the primary benefit? The primary benefit of medicinal mushrooms is what's called immunological modulation. And what that means is that it will sit in the background. It will enhance or stimulate your immune cells to be active or not. And that's why over the centuries, and that's where all the research, the greatest body of research has been focused, is the use of mushrooms to help our immune systems deal with the multiple issues that we have in our lifetime, whether that be stress or any type of low energy or other situation. That's the key to what a medicinal mushroom would do. Now, certain mushrooms will have other activities, like lion's mane will have stimulate nerve growth factor, things like that. So we can look at certain mushrooms and say, well, okay, this one you might use for another purpose. But primarily, what they're used for is immunological modulation, and that works for us on many, many different levels.
Jeff, I have so many questions about mushrooms. I'm trying to organize in my head. First, let me go back to my first question. We were talking about the psychoactive magic mushrooms. Are there more than one kind of mushroom that is psychoactive?
Well, yes, there are, but again, the primary genus is called psilocybe, but in that genus, there are dozens and dozens of different species. And what's interesting about that is that these species are worldwide, and we have them in North America, they're throughout Central America, there's some in South America, they are all over the world. And not just psilocybe, I guess one of the other main ones that's out there is Amanita muscaria. And what's interesting about that, Glenn, and what I was really fascinated with is that there is a trail leading deep, deep into prehistory and history that demonstrates that these mushrooms were used by people probably for the last 40 or 50,000 years. That we have a long history of psychoactive mushroom use. It's fascinating and amazing, and it involves the great religions and it involves paganism, but mushrooms, psychoactive mushrooms, have been with us and part of our development for a long, long time.
My first awareness of mushrooms having a psychoactive property was when I saw the movie Altered States a really long time ago. I presume you've seen it?
I have, yes. I remember that movie.
And do you know what kind of mushrooms they used?
I don't think they really said, and I would say this, that was a bit of a Hollywoodish type of movie. I don't think it did a very good presentation of mushrooms and how they're used and what they can do. But it was an introduction, and of course, certainly what you can talk about the state as an altered state, or I think what a better description is what has been called non-ordinary reality. Because when you think about it, we are in a reality that's pretty much based upon our society, which trains us with our culture. So we have a culture. We see the world according to how that culture has dictated to us. And if we enter one of these states, it is non-ordinary reality. And boy, is it ever. It is something that is completely different from what we normally experience. And I think one of the interesting parts about that, and people have speculated about this or said this for a long time, and that is that as we develop and mature as humans, what happens is our senses are slowly closed down to be more in tune with what our culture would like them to be in tune with, so that we lose a lot of what might be our ability to experience the world in a broader way.
So if a young child was left to live alone outside of society, they would possibly be a little more psychologically and socially in tune with nature, naturally, because they're around it, but also maybe the non-tangible world?
Absolutely. I absolutely believe that. I think that's definitely the case, because I mean, it's just like when people say, okay, I went out in the woods and I got away from the city, and all of a sudden I could hear sounds that I never heard before, and I stopped and I let my mind kind of drift, and then I heard the rushing water in the stream that I'm sitting by, and I heard the sound of the wind through the trees, and everything became much sharper and much greater, let's say, focus and awareness of the person. I think that's one of the ways that we could say and experience this to some degree. But when you take one of these mushrooms, it opens you up in a incredible way. And I don't know if you've ever seen the alchemical drawing, and it shows a man, he's sort of on his knees, and he's sticking his head through let's just say it's not really a wall, but he's sticking it through a membrane. And on the side he's in, it's a very mechanical world that we live in. And on the other side is a brightly lit world of rainbows and stars. And that's how I think you can look at it, is it takes you into maybe what you might even call another dimension, but it is definitely non-ordinary reality.
Fascinating. Jeff, I live in Portland, so not too far from you, and I get out into the woods and I see mushrooms, and they fascinate me. Their sizes and their shapes are amazing. I don't know a thing about them, so that's a huge reason why I wanted to bring you on the show. Is there anything you can tell people who are out wandering around the woods and they see mushrooms? Is there any sort of marks that they can easily know of which ones that will kill them and which ones they can eat?
Well, there are, but you do have to be trained. And what I would say, and Portland is a city I know well. My mother was born there. There is actually a mycological society, the Portland Mycological Society, and every year they will have a show where people in the society will bring in mushrooms from all the surrounding area. They'll put them out on tables. They'll identify them. They'll have seminars on identification. That's really what you have to do, because, for example, people will sometimes send me a photo of a mushroom and say, hey, do you know what this is? In fact, I got one of those last week. And I looked at it and I went, I really don't know what this is. And I would have to maybe go into the books, look for photos, see if I can find anything similar. But to do a proper identification, you need to be pretty much on the spot. You need to be able to look at it, look at a number of characteristics of that mushroom to be able to truly identify it. And the last thing you want to do is certainly to eat a wild mushroom without it being properly identified. There's always, every year, people that will harvest big, fleshy mushrooms, eat them, and the next thing you know, they're in the hospital. So it's very important to never eat a wild mushroom unless you've got somebody that you're with that knows them well, has eaten those. Like, for example, chanterelles. I don't know if you're familiar with chanterelles, but it's a mushroom that grows all up and down the coast. It's very easy to identify. That's the one I would certainly tell people, learn the chanterelle, because there's lots of them out there. It's a delicious mushroom. That would be it. And then what you do is you learn every year, you learn another one until maybe at a certain point you have 4 or 5 that you know, and you can go out and harvest.
So what you're saying is there's not any really solid identifying marks that say this one's poisonous, like a red stripe or dots or something like that?
Absolutely not. No.
Okay. That's unfortunate. And that was what my understanding was. Every time I see those mushrooms, I have that hesitation going, I just don't know, anything about them. And they look harmless enough, but, Well,
Portland Mycological Society, definitely contact them. They do forays in the fall, and that's the fun thing, is you can go out on a foray with people that know, and you walk around with them, and they will identify and they will teach you which ones to look for, so the next time you go out, you can actually identify them on your own. And again, like I say, in the beginning, you learn 1 or 2 species, and then you can go out with confidence and say, okay, I know this species. I've collected it before. I've eaten it, and it's all good.
Now, Jeff, I'm dying to know what sorts of ailments mushrooms can treat. Can you just ramble off the top ones that you can think of?
Well, you know what? I guess what I would say is if you seem to be tired, if you seem to get sick regularly with colds or flus, or just feel like you're run down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these are kind of broad-based types of illnesses, and oftentimes there are causes like, oh, this person's a smoker, is a drinker, that stays up too late and parties, all that kind of thing. They're not going to help you there. But in general, if you just feel like you're run down on a regular basis, I would say that's where you want to look at taking, for example, a mushroom supplement. Or, the first thing I would say to anybody is put mushrooms into your diet. Mushrooms are a fantastic food. The mushroom out there, the agaricus mushroom, the button mushroom's a very good mushroom.
I just ate some.
Fabulous. That was the mushroom when I went to work on the mushroom farm in 1973. That was the mushroom we grew there. We grew agaricus, and this was a big farm. We grew 2 million pounds a year. It was a very, very large operation.
And they're pretty light. That's a lot of mushrooms.
It's a lot of mushrooms. And I'll tell you, I was there for 10 years. I lived with mushrooms. I literally lived with them. I was there 6 days a week for many, many years. And interestingly enough, we had a Japanese scientist there who was doing research and development on shiitake, oyster mushroom, and another mushroom called enoki-take. So I was exposed to other mushrooms, and that was just amazing. I was eating fresh shiitake mushrooms in the 70s.
Huh. Well, before anybody had heard of them.
Yes, indeed. And that's the other mushroom I would say. Get shiitake mushroom, buy shiitake mushrooms, put them into your diet. And here's the what and where these benefits come from. The mushrooms have cell walls that are made up of a compound called the beta-glucan. And the beta-glucan is what has been identified by scientists as the immunologically active part of the mushroom. All mushrooms will have these beta-glucans as part of their cell walls, but the actual architecture of the beta-glucan will differ from mushroom to mushroom, which is why some mushrooms are active and others are less so. But putting mushrooms into your diet is something that you can do without necessarily going to a supplement. You can put mushrooms into your diet. They are also very, very high in fiber. They have a compound in their cell wall besides the beta-glucan. It's called chitin. Chitin is a structural polysaccharide type of compound. And so it will go through and will not be digested readily, but it will move into your lower intestine and into your microbiome. So there's a lot of fiber there that will feed your microbiome. And while it's doing it, it's activating receptor sites for these beta-glucans. So just by putting mushrooms into your diet, and especially the shiitake or the maitake or even the oyster mushroom, that will give you those immunological benefits.
So the shiitake would be the most nutritious out of all the standard mushrooms that people can find at the supermarket?
Well, nutritious in the sense of it does have a higher quality beta-glucans there, but mushrooms also have a reasonably high amount of protein for a vegetable, but they're very high in carbohydrates. They also have B vitamins, niacin, riboflavin. Those are great in quantities that are valuable as a food. The reason why mushrooms, and when I was at the mushroom farm in the 70s, most Western nutritionists considered mushrooms to be a valueless food, and you only ate them for flavor or garnish or something like that. The reason they said that was because mushrooms are low in calories. They had no energy. A low-cal food to a nutritionist is like, what's the point?
It's like non-alcoholic beer.
Exactly. And of course, low-cal now is pretty important for a lot of people, and people look at foods a little differently, and nutritionists have finally had to reevaluate mushrooms. And what they found is what we've known for a long time, whether it be in Asia or throughout Europe, is that mushrooms are a highly nutritious food. And like I say, that's the first step. put them into your diet. Eat them regularly. I eat mushrooms 3 or 4 or 5 times a week as part of my meals. And, I'm a meat eater, but for me, I also love vegetables and veggies. I mean, you can't imagine how quick my compost bucket fills up from all the veggies I'm eating.
Right.
It's just amazing. My garbage doesn't fill up much because I don't have a lot to throw away there, but my compost, holy smokes, I've got a lot of green waste from all the vegetables. So yes, put mushrooms into your diet. And again, mushrooms are what are considered adaptogens, and adaptogens really, Glenn, are non-specific. They work in the background. They work for stress. They modulate not only your immune system, but also other types of body functions. So don't expect to take mushrooms and the next morning you wake up and, oh my God, it's gone, my whatever. That's not how they work and not how you should look at them. There are certain mushrooms, like I'm sure you've heard of lion's mane, that do have certain activities, for example, stimulating what's called nerve growth factor, and have been shown to help with memory issues and are utilized in some cases for dementia. So there are mushrooms with these other properties. Some mushrooms will lower cholesterol. So yes, there are other activities, but immunological activities are the key.
You are listening to The Mushroom Man, Jeff Chilton, on the Live Fit podcast. For more information, visit the show notes page at livefitpodcast.com, episode 129. While there, take a look at my 28-day and my 9-week weight loss programs. See you there. So, yes, that's what I was just going to say. I wanted to go down the list of the things that mushrooms can help with to help improve health. So increasing immune system, adding fiber to your diet, which will lower your cholesterol, general malaise. What else?
Well, fatigue, lack of energy.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant by malaise. So maybe I used the word incorrectly.
Okay.
But so
I wasn't quite sure what a melee was. I mean, I know what a melee is, but I guess, again, a lot of people now, you're probably familiar with the whole term nootropics, and it seems to be a big category these days, and lion's mane has been singled out as a premier nootropic, and there actually there are clinical trials, which is very rare for herbal products, including mushrooms. There are clinical trials that demonstrate that the use of lion's mane, and not a lot either. In this particular study, which was done in Japan, with 30 people in each group, and it was placebo controlled. It did have the activity of enhancing memory for the group that took, and they only took 3 grams of the dried mushroom per day. That's really not a lot. If you think about that in fresh weight, that's only 30 grams of fresh weight, and that's maybe 1 or 2 of these lion's mane mushrooms. So with lion's mane, there's the possibility, without eating a lot of them, of getting some of those types of benefits. They also have used it in China for dementia. I just saw a study that was done in Japan as well, where they utilized it with people, and they gave them, this was a test done by psychologists. They gave them a bunch of tests, and they scored it all, and it seemed to help people with early onset dementia. So lion's mane, that's an activity that you might want to consider. Reishi also has similar properties to that. When it comes to endurance, for example, cordyceps is used for endurance. It's used for weakness, asthenia. When you're coming out of a long illness, cordyceps has been used traditionally for that, neurasthenia. That's another area one might consider in terms of using these mushrooms. And now what's happened, because of the fact that mushrooms tend to help with low energy and fatigue, Now it's sort of been designated as a mushroom that could be used for athletics. So it tends to be pigeonholed into that area. One of the interesting studies showed that it didn't seem to have any effect on high level athletes, but was more effective with people that weren't necessarily your Olympic athletes or your professionals or so on.
What about weight loss?
Well, weight loss is a interesting area. There is some information about maitake and its use for diabetics. So a lot of that comes from the fact that mushrooms, one of the carbohydrates that they have is mannitol, which is a sugar that is a slow acting sugar. This might get back to the whole fiber aspect of mushrooms, fill you up a bit. But yeah, that's one of the major carbohydrates in mushrooms is mannitol.
Well, let's focus now on the most common mushrooms that people see in the grocery store. So button mushrooms, are those the little white ones or the little brown ones?
Well, they're both. That's actually the same species. It's just a different strain or a different what we call a variety. So those button mushrooms will come in brown, white, cream, off-white.
Is there a nutritional difference between the different colors?
No.
And does it matter if you cook them, eat them raw, or dry them? Do they gain or lose any nutrition?
Well, no, they don't really lose anything, and that's one of the beauties of the beta-glucans is they don't lose anything by cooking. The one thing about the agaricus is that it does have some compounds called hydrazines, which means that you probably shouldn't eat the agaricus raw, although in the amount that people would eat them raw, it's not really a big problem. But I would say cooking the agaricus is important. And let me say this about cooking mushrooms. This is where people go wrong. You need to cook mushrooms on high heat. You need to heat up that pan, throw in some butter or oil, whatever you want. If you're cooking them on their own, throw them in. Let them cook on that high heat. You don't want to put them in and have on a low heat and all of a sudden you see a big puddle of water in your pan. It's like you've cooked all the moisture out of these things. You cook them on a high heat. I like to actually, I'll even, when I slice them, and I slice them not too thin, I slice them, maybe 1/8 of an inch, sometimes to 1/4 of an inch. And then I will even at times turn them over by hand so that I brown each side. I love to just brown each side. I mean, yeah, can you imagine? I'm like flipping them in the pan. Okay, it's like, okay, you're ready. I'm going to flip you over.
Yeah, tweezers. Flipping them over.
And so cook them on a high heat. I like to cook them fairly well. I don't like them undercooked, and that gets back to the browning of them. So I'll brown them really well. I'll cook them. I like to cook them in butter myself. I like some salt and pepper on them.
And that cooking them in a high heat fast keeps the moisture inside, right? So you're like caramelizing the outside.
Absolutely correct. Yeah. And why do people not like mushrooms? Oh, they're soggy and slimy and all the rest. Well, yeah, because they've been improperly cooked. You have to cook them right to really get the flavor. Then you pull them out and they're not wet and soggy. They're dry. They can be crunchy. They've got texture. They're delicious. And so that's number one. Definitely do not harm those or mushrooms with your cooking technique. So really, that's the first thing I would tell people about it. And then in terms of the other mushrooms like your shiitake or for example oyster mushrooms, you don't even have to slice an oyster mushroom. You just hold the cap and you just pull it, just strip off sections of it you can pull them and they will go right down to the end of the stem, and you just throw them into the pan like that. I mean, right now in today's world, we have more mushroom varieties in the store than we've ever had before, and it is a wonderful thing. You can probably get close to 6 or 8 different varieties if you go into your local Whole Foods or natural food store.
Oh, and yeah, I've seen that, and farmers market as well. Boy, they have all kinds.
Well, there you go. And that's the place to buy. There are small mushroom producers out there, and they are coming to the markets, and support them, because let me tell you, it is not easy to grow mushrooms, not at all. And the fact is, oh yeah, sure, as a hobby, you can grow mushrooms at home, but if you want to make a living at it, you have to reach a certain size. And in reaching that size, you literally are spending your life with these things, because it's a crop that is growing all the time. You have to be there babysitting it. You can't leave it and come back and go, oh yeah, everything's fine with my vegetables in the garden. No, you get back and the mushrooms have grown up. They are now over mature. They've fallen over. They're rotting. They've sporulated. It's a mess.
No kidding. Wow.
Oh yeah.
I never knew it was so difficult to grow mushrooms. I mean, I do it with hardly any effort in my back lawn.
That's the easiest way to grow mushrooms.
But I probably don't want to eat those.
Well, here's the other thing. A lot of mushrooms that you see out there, you don't want to eat them because they're not fleshy. They're small, or don't have enough meat on them to make it worthwhile to eat them. Whereas there's others that are nice. They're large enough, or they're clusters of these where there's lots of small ones that you can throw into your pan. Some of the mushrooms, man, I tell you, like the enoki taki. I don't know if you've tried enoki taki.
I have not.
Enoki is a package of it's yellowish inside of it. It's usually vacuum packed because it comes from somewhere. But there's hundreds of these things in a cluster. And you get them out and you just strip them away till you have a lot of individual ones. You throw them in the hot pan. They are like crunchy noodles. They're delicious.
Huh. You clearly like mushrooms.
I do.
What about washing them?
Well, first of all, let me say, if you talk to a wild mushroom or somebody in the mycologicals, they say, don't you dare wash that mushroom.
It seems like a sponge and it absorbs water, but when you get them from the store or wherever you get them, they might have dirt on them, which I don't see as a big problem. But what about other things? Is there a risk of E. coli or something else that you wouldn't want to eat raw?
Well, look, I wash my mushrooms if I see dirt on them. I'm not going to eat dirt. You get sometimes from the store, an agaricus mushroom, it'll have the casing layer on it, which is what they grow out of. I mean, I don't get out my brush and finely brush them down. I just put them under the faucet and quickly rinse them and get them back. They're not going to absorb water. The water runs right off them. So that's kind of something that, again, purists will not like me for saying that. But, I mean, come on. And that's the other thing. If you're hunting mushrooms, when you're out there and you pull it out of the ground or whatever and the bottom of it's got dirt all over it, snip that off before you put it in your bag.
Yeah.
Nothing's worse than a bag of wild mushrooms which has all of the substrate on it. And then you look into your bag and that dirt is now all in the gills. It's everywhere. You just completely contaminated the whole bit with soil.
Yeah.
And in terms of your question about other molds or organisms on there, well, certainly with wild mushrooms you'll have a lot of that, and you just have to look at it, and normally you can see if something else has grown on it. Other fungi will grow on mushrooms, so they will attack it, and this is the other thing that I do when I'm out there mushroom hunting. Sometimes people they see, for example, chanterelles. They don't know enough to go, hey, the condition of that one, it is old, it's over the hill, or it's too young. They just take them all. No, take the ones that are prime. That's what you want to eat. You don't want to take something that's old. As a mushroom gets old, bacteria will get on it. It will start to decompose the mushroom. If you see mushrooms in the supermarket, and let me tell you, I've seen some of the worst ragged mushroom species in the supermarket as out in the wild. Produce managers at times do not know how to handle mushrooms, don't know how to treat them. If you see something in there that, whether it's a shiitake or an agaricus, for example, agaricus, if it starts to have brown spots on it, that's bacteria. If it has a little bit of a slimy knot, not moist but slimy, that's bacteria. If you see the same with the shiitake, if you look at it and you look at the gills and the gills are starting to have brown spots or something, reject it. You can tell the difference between a fresh prime mushroom quite easily. So be aware of that and be on the outlook for it. Don't buy those.
I think the problem is that mushrooms are such a mystery to most people. You and a few others totally get into it, so they know a plethora of information about mushrooms, but the general public and even somebody like me who's interested in them, I still don't know very much, and I haven't even tasted very many mushrooms. So where can somebody learn more about mushrooms without becoming a mycologist?
Yeah. Well, again, go to your local mycological society, and certainly if you're in Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, San Francisco, they have very well developed mycological societies. And what you bring up is one of the facts that makes it so difficult for people to approach mushrooms and know what's good to eat and not. And Glenn, it's exactly the same with supplements, and I want to introduce that to you and your listeners in the final minutes here, and that is that we can grow a mushroom in North America. We can grow it fresh. We can put it into the market, and we can get a good price for it. Let's say the grower's selling it for $5, but you cannot grow mushrooms in North America for supplement use because supplements are dried. So when you take that mushroom that you've just sold a pound to your supermarket, you as the grower, or you've just sold it to somebody and you've sold it for $5 a pound, if you dry that out, you have to get $50 for that now because it's 90% water.
Right.
If it's $50 a pound, there's no company in the U.S. that can afford to purchase that and turn around and sell it as a supplement. So what happens is that producers in the United States have produced what is called mycelium, and they grow that on sterile grain. And at the end of the process, they dry that mycelium and grain. They dry it, grind it to a powder. They don't separate out the grain from the final product. Mycelium is the vegetative body of this fungal organism. That is what we don't normally see. It's in the ground. It's in a piece of wood. That is the vegetative body that's decomposing its nutrient substrate out there. And when the conditions are right, like for us in the Northwest in the fall, it will produce a mushroom. Mm-hmm. So the mycelium is a stage or plant part. It's the vegetative part of this particular organism. The mushroom is what we call the fruiting body. So it's almost like an apple tree and an apple. The mycelium, you can think of it almost as a root system, amassing nutrients and sending it up to that mushroom. Now, in the United States, companies will grow that mycelium on a sterile grain. They'll grow it in a laboratory. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the process, they will simply dry it, grind it to a powder. And the worst part about it is they will then sell it as a mushroom.
Okay.
And
so is there a website, yours or another, that you would recommend that people could go to, or a book that people could go to learn more information about mushrooms?
Well, please come to my company website. It's Nammex, Nammex.com. We have lots of information there that talks about mushrooms, talks about the different stages, talks about why there's a very big differences in the different products out there in the marketplace. So please come to the website. We've got a ton of content there that will educate you. I spend most of my time educating people about the supplement market, Glenn, because of these other products that are out there that masquerade as mushrooms.
And it gives mushrooms a bad rap if people are taking stuff they think is pure and turns out it's really not.
Well, think about this. I go to a trade show called Paleo FX, and paleo people who are into the paleo diet and the whole paleo sort of idea, they do not eat grains for the most part. And when I talk to people and they come to me and say, oh yeah, I'm taking a great mushroom product, I said, oh wow, that's wonderful. What's the brand? And they tell me the brand. And I say, I hate to tell you this, but what you're actually taking is a lot of grain and the thing is that the grain is a lot of starch and we've done a lot of testing and studies that demonstrate that those products are mostly starch with very, very low amounts of beta glucans, which is just the opposite of a real genuine mushroom, which does not have any starch. So
they should just eat the mushroom.
Well, that's number one. Eat the mushroom, and then later on at some point, if you want a supplement, definitely be on the lookout for these other products and stay away from them.
And Jeff, you are co-author on a book called The Mushroom Cultivator, a practical guide to growing mushrooms at home. I'm going to have a link to that book and your website and some more information about mushrooms at livefitpodcast.com. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us today, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure too, Glenn. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm just happy to spread the word about mushrooms.